"Shut up," he barked, loud enough for every parent in the bleachers to hear, as if 2 words could erase a woman's dignity in front of a Friday night crowd. The stadium lights hummed overhead, casting a pale white glow across the 50-yard line of Jefferson High's football field, where the air carried the faint scent of fresh-cut grass and popcorn from the concession stand. Coach Renee Carter stood near the sideline, clipboard tucked under her arm, her posture straight and composed despite the tension tightening around her like a drawn wire. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't causing a scene. She had simply questioned why one of her players, a 16-year-old honor student, was being ordered off the field without explanation. Officer Daniel Whitmore stepped closer, boots pressing into the turf, his uniform crisp, his badge gleaming under the lights. To him, the scene was simple. Authority had spoken. Authority expected obedience. And in his mind, she had just crossed a line. The crowd shifted uneasily in the stands, whispers rising like wind before a storm. Some phones were already lifted, screens glowing in the dark. Renee didn't raise her voice. She didn't match his tone. Instead, she met his eyes with a calm that felt almost unsettling. "Officer," she said evenly, her voice steady enough to cut through the noise without ever rising above it. "I'm asking for a reason." That was when his jaw tightened. That was when something in him hardened. The distance between them shrank to less than a foot, close enough for her to see the faint crease between his brows, close enough for him to believe proximity meant power. "You don't get to question me," he said, each word clipped and deliberate. Around them, shoulder pads clinked as players stood frozen, unsure whether to look away or keep watching. The marching band, halfway through packing up their instruments, had gone silent. Renee felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her back, the weight of expectation pressing in from every direction. In neighborhoods like this, scenes like this traveled fast. A raised voice became a rumor. A rumor became a headline. But Renee had learned long ago that silence, when chosen, was not weakness. It was strategy. She adjusted her grip on the clipboard, her movements measured, controlled, as if the entire exchange were unfolding in slow motion. 2 hours earlier, she had been in this same stadium reviewing security camera angles in her mind, noting the unfamiliar black sedan that had circled the parking lot twice before settling beneath a broken streetlight. She had noticed the assistant principal whispering into his phone near the equipment shed. She had noticed more than anyone realized. And yet here she stood, being told to be quiet in a place where she had poured 3 years of her life mentoring kids who trusted her more than they trusted the system. "I'm not interfering," she said, her tone unchanged, calm as a still lake before dawn. "I'm protecting my student." A murmur rippled through the bleachers. Whitmore's expression flickered, irritation mixing with something sharper. He had expected defensiveness. He had expected anger. He had not expected composure. And composure, in moments like this, felt like defiance. Somewhere beyond the field, an engine idled briefly before cutting off. The sound was subtle, easy to miss. Renee didn't glance toward it. She didn't need to. The night air felt heavier now, thick with the kind of tension that makes time stretch. Whitmore believed he was restoring order. The crowd believed they were witnessing another uncomfortable scene that would fade by morning. But beneath the bright stadium lights, something far bigger than a sideline dispute was already in motion, and the man demanding silence had no idea he had just stepped into the center of it. The silence did not break right away. It stretched, thin and electric, across the entire field, as if the stadium itself was holding its breath. Officer Daniel Whitmore straightened his shoulders and glanced toward the bleachers, aware now of the glowing phone screens aimed in his direction. He forced a tight smile that did not reach his eyes. "This is a lawful investigation," he announced, projecting his voice toward the crowd as much as toward Coach Renee Carter. "If you continue to interfere, you will be asked to leave school property." The words sounded official, controlled, practiced. Renee did not move. The scoreboard behind her flickered, showing 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter, though the game had long since faded into the background. Her players stood clustered near the bench, helmets in hand, confusion written across young faces that had trusted her to keep them safe. She felt that responsibility settle heavier on her shoulders than any pressure from the officer standing inches away. "I am not interfering," she repeated, her tone calm, almost measured enough to be mistaken for indifference. I am requesting clarification. It was the kind of sentence built to travel well if replayed later. Whitmore took a slow step back, scanning her from head to toe as if trying to decide whether she was worth the trouble. In his mind, this was supposed to be simple. A call had come in about suspicious activity near the parking lot. A report mentioned a vehicle circling twice. A description had been vague, but suspicion had already found its target. What he did not know was that 2 hours earlier, Renee had documented the same vehicle, noting the partial license plate in a small leather notebook tucked inside her gym bag. She had recognized the pattern because she had seen it before in another city, in another district, where funds meant for community programs had quietly disappeared. The assistant principal who had whispered into his phone now stood near the concession stand pretending to focus on a cash drawer, but his eyes kept drifting back toward the confrontation. The night air carried a low rumble from a passing freight train a mile away, the sound vibrating faintly through the metal bleachers. Renee allowed herself one steady breath. She had trained for high-pressure situations in places far more volatile than a high school field. But what made this moment delicate was not danger. It was optics. It was perception. It was the thin line between standing firm and escalating a scene that would hurt the very students she was trying to protect. Whitmore reached for his radio, pressing the button with deliberate emphasis. "Dispatch, I may need backup at Jefferson High," he said, eyes still fixed on her. The words were not shouted, but they carried a warning. A few parents began to gather near the fence, murmuring about fairness and overreach. One of the team captains took a tentative step forward before Renee lifted her hand slightly, a subtle signal to stay back. She would not let this turn into something chaotic. Not tonight. In the distance, beyond the glow of the stadium lights, headlights briefly flared and then dimmed, as if a vehicle had shifted into park. Renee did not look. She did not react. She simply held Whitmore's gaze with a quiet certainty that unsettled him more than any raised voice could have. He believed he was tightening control over a situation that threatened his authority. He did not realize that every word spoken, every order given, every second of this exchange was being measured against a larger operation already unfolding beyond the boundaries of that field. The flashing lights arrived before the sirens, red and blue reflections dancing across the aluminum bleachers and the glossy helmets lined along the bench. A second patrol car rolled slowly through the gravel entrance beside the stadium, tires crunching under the weight of attention now fixed on the field. Officer Daniel Whitmore lowered his radio and gave a subtle nod, as if reinforcements confirmed he had been right all along. To him, this was procedure. To the crowd, it was escalation. Coach Renee Carter remained where she stood, feet planted at the edge of the sideline, the white boundary stripe glowing beneath her sneakers. She could feel the temperature dropping as the sun fully disappeared beyond the tree line, the night settling in with a quiet chill that crept through damp fabric and tightened muscles. Her players were still watching her, searching her face for cues, for reassurance, for proof that calm was still possible. She gave them a small nod, steady and intentional. "Trust me." Whitmore gestured toward the parking lot. "Ma'am, I am asking you one final time to step away from this area while we conduct our investigation." His voice carried a rehearsed firmness, but there was something beneath it now, something uneasy. Backup had arrived, but so had witnesses. Renee tilted her head slightly, as if considering the request. "If there is an active investigation," she replied, her tone unwavering, "then transparency should not be a threat." A murmur of agreement drifted from the stands. One parent stepped closer to the railing, arms crossed. Not shouting, not interfering, just observing. Observation, Renee knew, was powerful. She had built her career on it. 2 hours earlier, she had traced a pattern of shell companies connected to a regional construction grant that had never reached the schools it was promised to. She had identified familiar names woven quietly through local contracts. One of those names belonged to a distant relative of the assistant principal who now refused to meet her eyes. The black sedan she had noted in her book was not random. It was a signal. The timing of this so-called call for service was not coincidence. Whitmore glanced toward the second officer who had joined him, a younger man shifting his weight uncertainly, clearly aware that the situation was no longer routine. "Coach," the younger officer said more gently, "we just need cooperation." The word hung in the air. Cooperation. Renee almost smiled, not out of amusement, but recognition. Cooperation was what she had been offering all along, just not in the way Whitmore expected. Beyond the chain-link fence, two unmarked sport utility vehicles eased into the outer lot, their engines cutting off almost simultaneously. They did not flash lights. They did not draw attention. They simply arrived. Renee's watch vibrated once against her wrist, a subtle pulse no one else could hear. She did not look down. She did not check a message. She only shifted her weight slightly, the way someone does when they know a clock has reached zero. Whitmore folded his arms, attempting to reclaim authority through posture alone. "This is your last warning," he said, more to assert dominance than to resolve anything. The stadium lights buzzed overhead, illuminating every expression, every flicker of doubt crossing his face. Renee met his stare with the same steady calm she had held all night. "Officer," she said softly, almost kindly, "you are not investigating what you think you are." For a brief second, confusion flashed in his eyes. The younger officer turned toward the parking lot as car doors opened in the distance, measured footsteps approaching across asphalt. The night no longer felt like a high school football game. It felt like something shifting beneath the surface, something larger than a sideline dispute, something that had been moving quietly long before Whitmore ever stepped onto that field. The footsteps from the parking lot were calm, unhurried, the kind of steps taken by people who did not need to prove authority because they already carried it. Officer Daniel Whitmore turned at the sound, irritation flashing across his face before he masked it with a tight expression of control. Two men and one woman approached from beyond the stadium fence, dressed in dark suits that blended into the night, their movements precise, coordinated without a single visible signal between them. They did not look at the crowd. They did not look at the players. Their eyes went directly to Renee. The younger patrol officer shifted uneasily, beside Whitmore, sensing a change he could not yet name. "This area is restricted," Whitmore called out, lifting his chin slightly, as if volume alone could reassert command. The woman in the suit reached the sideline first, her heels quiet against the pavement. She did not respond to the warning. Instead, she stopped 3 feet from Renee and gave a subtle nod, professional and unmistakable. "Ma'am," she said evenly, "we have been expecting your signal." The words were not loud, but in the stillness of the field they carried like a struck bell. A ripple moved through the bleachers. Phones tilted for a better angle. Whitmore frowned. "Who are you?" he demanded, stepping forward. The man behind the woman produced a small leather credential wallet, flipping it open just long enough for the gold seal to catch the stadium lights. He did not wave it dramatically. He did not announce anything to the crowd. He simply held it steady at Whitmore's eye level. The color drained slightly from Whitmore's face as recognition replaced irritation. Federal. Not local. Not optional. Renee finally allowed herself to shift her stance, no longer positioned defensively but centered, composed, exactly where she intended to be. "Officer," she said softly, her voice carrying neither triumph nor anger, "you requested backup." Whitmore glanced toward his patrol car as if searching for familiar ground. The second patrol officer took a cautious step back, understanding instinctively that jurisdiction had just shifted. One of the suited agents spoke into a discreet earpiece, confirming details in a low voice that never rose above professional calm. Beyond the field, more unmarked vehicles rolled quietly into place, forming a perimeter that was orderly rather than aggressive. This was not chaos. This was structure. The assistant principal near the concession stand paled visibly, his earlier confidence dissolving as one of the agents turned his direction with measured intent. Renee looked toward her players and offered them the smallest reassuring smile. The message was simple. Stay calm. Trust the process. Whitmore swallowed, attempting to gather himself. "If there is a federal matter," he said carefully, "I was not informed." The woman agent met his eyes without hostility. "You were not meant to be," she replied. The weight of those words settled heavier than any raised voice could have. Under the bright Friday night lights, the balance of power had shifted without a single dramatic gesture. The man who believed he controlled the scene now stood on the edge of information he did not possess, while the woman he had ordered to be silent remained steady at the center of an operation far larger than he ever imagined. The field no longer felt like a football game under Friday night lights. It felt like a quiet courtroom without walls. The agents moved with measured precision, one speaking calmly into an earpiece while another approached the assistant principal near the concession stand. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. Authority had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Officer Daniel Whitmore stood rigid, eyes flicking between the federal credentials and the growing presence of unmarked vehicles forming a silent perimeter around the parking lot. The younger patrol officer beside him lowered his gaze, instinctively stepping half a pace back, understanding that the chain of command had just extended far beyond their precinct. Coach Renee Carter finally stepped forward, not toward confrontation, but toward clarity. The woman agent who had addressed her moments earlier handed her a slim folder, discreet and unmarked. Renee accepted it without hesitation, her movements steady, practiced. She opened it just enough to confirm what she already knew. Account transfers, contract signatures, shell organizations that existed only on paper. The construction grant that was meant to renovate Jefferson High's aging science wing had been diverted through a network of local partnerships. The black sedan that circled earlier had not been watching students. It had been watching her. Whitmore cleared his throat, attempting to reclaim footing. If there is an investigation involving school administration, my department should have been notified, he said, his tone carefully measured now, stripped of earlier sharpness. The woman agent turned to him, her expression neutral. Your department is being notified, she replied. The words were simple, but the implication was vast. Across the field, parents whispered in disbelief, some lowering their phones as realization replaced curiosity. This was no longer about a sideline disagreement. It was about money, trust, and a system that had quietly failed the very community it claimed to protect. Renee closed the folder and looked directly at Whitmore. There was no anger in her eyes, only certainty. The call you responded to, she said calmly, was placed from a device linked to one of the accounts under review. The younger officer's head snapped slightly toward Whitmore. The assistant principal, now flanked by two agents, appeared visibly shaken as he was asked to step away from the concession area for questioning. Still, there was no spectacle, no shouting, just procedure unfolding with clinical precision. The stadium lights hummed overhead, illuminating faces that had expected a game and instead witnessed accountability. Whitmore swallowed, the weight of the moment settling into his posture. He had arrived believing he was restoring order. He now stood inside an operation that had been active for months, one that did not require his approval to proceed. Renee adjusted the whistle that hung at her neck, a simple symbol of her role in the community. My priority has always been these students, she said quietly, her voice carrying across the field without force. That has not changed. In the distance, another unmarked vehicle pulled in, completing the circle. The night air felt different now, lighter somehow, as if something hidden had finally been exposed to the light. And the man who had once believed he controlled the narrative realized he had only stepped into the middle of a story already written. The agents did not rush, and that was what made the moment feel irreversible. One of them stepped toward Officer Daniel Whitmore with a calm professionalism that left no room for argument. Officer, he said evenly, for the record, we will need you to remain present while we clarify your involvement in tonight's call. The word involvement landed heavier than accusation. Whitmore's jaw tightened, but he nodded, aware now that every movement was being observed not just by the crowd, but by federal eyes trained to read hesitation. The younger patrol officer shifted beside him, uncertainty written across his face. He had responded to a routine dispatch. He had not expected to stand in the middle of a financial investigation tied to school funding and potential misuse of public resources. Across the field, two agents escorted the assistant principal toward one of the unmarked vehicles, speaking to him in low, controlled tones. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, just the quiet unfolding of accountability. Coach Renee Carter remained near the sideline, the stadium lights outlining her silhouette against the dark sky. She watched carefully, not with satisfaction, but with focus. Months of preparation had led to this controlled exposure. The suspicious contracts, the rerouted grants, the quiet complaints from teachers about missing equipment that had supposedly been ordered. She had followed the pattern patiently, documenting every detail, waiting for confirmation before moving forward. Whitmore cleared his throat, attempting to steady himself. If my response was based on a call connected to this matter, he said cautiously, Then I acted in good faith. The lead agent regarded him without hostility. That is part of what we are determining, she replied. The statement was neutral, but it stripped away his earlier certainty. Good faith would now be measured against facts. Renee stepped forward slightly, her voice calm, resonant under the humming lights. The device that placed the call pinged within 20 feet of the administrative office, she said, not addressing the crowd, but speaking to the agents as if continuing a briefing already in progress. The same office linked to the diverted construction funds. A quiet murmur rippled through the remaining parents in the stands. The pieces were connecting in real time. Whitmore felt the ground beneath his authority shift. He had assumed disorder. He had assumed resistance. Instead, he had stepped into a structured investigation already mapped out long before his arrival. One of the agents approached him with a small tablet, displaying timestamps and dispatch logs. We will also need access to your body camera footage from the moment you arrived, the agent said. It was not a request. It was procedure. The younger patrol officer slowly removed his hat, exhaling as if only now realizing how fragile assumptions could be. Renee glanced toward her players once more. They were watching quietly, witnessing something rare. Not chaos, not retaliation, but systems correcting themselves in the open. The air felt clearer, sharper, as if truth had its own temperature. Whitmore stood under the same lights that had once amplified his authority, now illuminating his uncertainty instead. And in that steady glow, the lesson was unmistakable. Power without understanding is noise. Accountability, when it arrives, does not shout. It simply stands and waits. The stadium had grown quieter, not because people had left, but because they were listening differently now. Conversations were softer, more careful, as if everyone understood they were witnessing something that would be talked about long after the lights shut off. Officer Daniel Whitmore stood beneath those lights with an unfamiliar weight pressing against his chest. An agent finished reviewing the timestamps on the tablet and gave a small nod to the lead investigator. The dispatch call originated from a registered device tied to the administrative office. The agent confirmed, voice level, precise. And the body camera footage will be uploaded directly to federal review. Whitmore inhaled slowly, aware that his earlier certainty had been replaced by scrutiny. He had believed he was responding to a disturbance. Now he was part of a documented chain of events. The younger patrol officer stepped aside as instructed, allowing the agents space to continue their process. No one raised a voice. No one needed to. Procedure itself carried authority. Coach Renee Carter remained composed, her hands resting lightly at her sides, the whistle at her neck catching the light. For months, she had walked these same yards of turf, encouraging discipline, teamwork, resilience. Tonight, those same principles were unfolding on a different scale. The assistant principal, now seated in the back of an unmarked vehicle with the door open and agents nearby, looked smaller than he had earlier in the evening. Not diminished by force, but by exposure. Renee took a slow step forward, her voice steady as she addressed the lead agent. The remaining files are backed up through the secure channel, she said quietly. Everything connects to the same account. The agent nodded once, confirming receipt. Whitmore's gaze shifted toward Renee, a mix of confusion and reluctant realization crossing his face. You were never just a coach, he said, not accusing, not quite asking. Renee met his eyes calmly. I have always been a coach, she replied. Protecting my students simply required more than a whistle. The words settled into the night air, neither boastful nor sharp. They were factual. The crowd, sensing resolution, began to thin slowly, parents guiding their children toward the exits. Conversations hushed but thoughtful. The game clock still showed time remaining, yet everyone understood the real contest had ended. One of the agents approached Whitmore again. Internal affairs will follow up with your department, she stated. Your cooperation is expected. It was not threatening. It was inevitable. Whitmore nodded once, shoulders no longer squared in dominance, but held in restrained acceptance. He glanced at the younger officer, who avoided his eyes, processing the lesson in silence. Renee turned toward her players at last. Helmets on, she called gently, her tone returning to familiar ground. We finish what we start. The simple instruction grounded the moment, pulling it back to the field where it began. The stadium lights continued their steady hum, illuminating a space that had transformed without chaos, without spectacle, only through truth stepping forward at the right time. And as the agents concluded their immediate actions and prepared for the next phase of the investigation, one reality stood undeniable beneath the bright American night sky. Authority may speak loudly, but integrity does not need volume to be heard. The whistle cut clean through the cool night air, sharp and familiar, and for a moment the entire stadium remembered why they had come. The players moved back into position, shoulder pads squared, cleats digging into the turf as if reclaiming ground that had briefly belonged to tension instead of sport. Coach Renee Carter walked along the sideline with steady purpose, her voice firm but calm as she called out assignments. Focus on the snap. Control your breathing. Finish strong. The words were simple, but they carried more meaning now. Across the field, the agents continued their quiet coordination, one vehicle pulling away slowly with the assistant principal seated inside, another remaining parked near the entrance as documentation was finalized. Officer Daniel Whitmore stood near his patrol car, speaking in low tones with the younger officer while waiting for formal instructions from his department. The confidence that once framed his posture had softened into reflection. He glanced once more toward Renee, watching as she guided her team without hesitation, without distraction. The game resumed with a steady rhythm, the quarterback calling signals, the offensive line holding firm for a crucial play. The crowd, though smaller now, began to clap again, the sound cautious at first, then growing stronger. Life was returning to its lane, but something fundamental had shifted beneath it. Renee paused near the 50-yard line as the clock ticked down, eyes scanning not just the formation on the field but the faces in the stands. Parents who once looked uncertain now watched her with new understanding. Some offered quiet nods. Others simply observed, absorbing the lesson unfolding in real time. The federal vehicles no longer felt intrusive. They felt like evidence that oversight existed, even when unseen. Whitmore's radio crackled softly, and he listened carefully, responding with measured words that lacked the earlier edge. Procedure would continue beyond this night. Reports would be written. Reviews would be conducted. But here, under these lights, the immediate truth had already revealed itself. Renee gathered her players during a brief timeout, forming a tight circle near the sideline. What happens outside the lines does not change who you are inside them, she told them, her voice steady, reaching each young face. You play with discipline. You lead with integrity. That is how you win. They broke the huddle with renewed focus, helmets tapping together in quiet solidarity. The final minutes drained from the clock, and when the buzzer sounded, it felt less like the end of a game and more like the closing of a chapter. The agents completed their tasks and began to depart, engines starting one by one, their presence receding as discreetly as it had arrived. Whitmore watched them leave, then looked down at his badge, the metal reflecting the bright stadium lights in sharp relief. For the first time that evening, he did not appear certain of what it represented. Renee stood at midfield, hands on her hips, breathing in the cool American night. The field was still the same 100 yards it had always been. The bleachers still rose 30 feet above the turf. The lights still hummed overhead. Yet something invisible had been corrected. And as the crowd filtered out beneath the glow of parking lot lamps, one truth lingered in the quiet air. Authority may arrive loudly, but accountability leaves a deeper echo. The stadium lights began to power down one row at a time, each section dimming with a soft mechanical click that echoed across the emptying bleachers. The field that had felt like a stage only minutes earlier slowly returned to what it had always been, 100 yards of painted turf beneath a wide American sky. Parents guided their children toward the parking lot, conversations quieter now, more thoughtful than before. Some glanced back at Coach Renee Carter as she gathered stray water bottles and folded up a sideline bench, not as spectators, but as witnesses who had seen something shift. Officer Daniel Whitmore remained near his patrol car, the red and blue reflections no longer flashing, just a steady silhouette against the glow of the remaining lights. He removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, staring at the badge in his palm as if trying to understand it for the first time. It had always felt like authority. Tonight it felt like responsibility. The younger patrol officer approached him cautiously. "Internal affairs will reach out in the morning," he said quietly. Whitmore nodded once, the movement restrained, absorbing the weight of what that meant. Across the field, Renee walked toward the center logo and paused. The painted emblem beneath her shoes represented school pride, community effort, the promise that public institutions were meant to serve those who trusted them. She looked around at the now empty stands rising nearly 30 feet above the turf, remembering the faces of her players when they had searched her expression for reassurance. She had given it to them not with force, but with steadiness. The last of the federal vehicles rolled out of the lot without sirens, without spectacle. Procedure would continue in offices and conference rooms miles away from this field. Documents would be reviewed. Accounts would be traced. Decisions would be made. But the most important lesson had already taken root here. Whitmore finally stepped forward, stopping several yards from Renee. He did not cross the distance completely. "I responded to a call," he said, his voice no longer sharp, but measured. Renee met his gaze calmly. "And you made a choice about what you believed," she replied. There was no accusation in her tone, only truth. The night air carried a faint chill as a breeze moved across the field, rustling the flags above the scoreboard. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was different now. It was not tension. It was recognition. Whitmore gave a small nod, as if acknowledging something unspoken, then turned back toward his vehicle. Renee remained at midfield a few seconds longer, breathing in the quiet. She had never needed to shout to be heard. She had never needed to demand respect to carry authority. As the final row of lights dimmed and the field settled into darkness, one reality lingered in the cooling air. He believed the badge gave him power over her, but she carried something stronger, the patience to let truth arrive on its own time, and when it did not need to raise its voice.